I've visited Amelia on many occasions, and one thing I think she said on every occasion that I ever saw her was, God is still on the throne. And I think that's something that we all need to remember. Anyway, our reading is from Isaiah chapter 58. Justice, do you rulers know the meaning of the word? Do you judge the people fairly? No. You plot injustice in your hearts. You spread violence. I've turned to Psalms. I thought to myself, this doesn't sound what Lou is going to be preaching on today. Sorry, apologies. Maybe it's appropriate, I don't know. Shout with the voice of a trumpet blast. Shout aloud. Don't be timid. Tell my people Israel of their sins. Yet they act so pious. They come to the temple every day and seem delighted to learn all about me. They act like a righteous nation that would never abandon the laws of its God. They ask me to take action on their behalf, pretending they want to be near me. We have fasted before you, they say. Why aren't you impressed? We have been very hard on ourselves, and you don't even notice it. I will tell you why, I respond. It's because you are fasting to please yourselves. Even while you fast, you keep oppressing your workers. What good is fasting when you keep on fighting and quarreling? This kind of fasting will never get you anywhere with me. You humble yourselves by going through the motions of penance, bowing your heads like reeds bending in the wind. You dress in burlap and cover yourselves with ashes. Is this what you call fasting? Do you really think this will please the Lord? No. This is the kind of fasting I want. Free those who are wrongly imprisoned. Lighten the burden of those who work for you. Let the oppressed go free, and remove the chains that bind people. Share your food with the hungry, and give shelter to the homeless. Give clothes to those who need them, and do not hide from relatives who need your help. Then your salvation will come like the dawn, and your wounds will quickly heal. Your goodness will lead you forward. Your goodliness will lead you forward, and the glory of the Lord will protect you from behind. Then when you call, the Lord will never, Then your salvation will come like the dawn, and your wounds will quickly heal. Your godliness will lead you forward, and the glory of the Lord will protect you from behind. Then when you call, the Lord will answer, "Yes, I am here," he will quickly reply. Remove the heavy yoke of oppression. Stop pointing your finger and spreading vicious rumors. Feed the hungry and help those in trouble. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be as bright as noon. The Lord will guide you continually, giving you water when you are dry and restoring your strength. You will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring.
Okay. Does anyone here like food? I thought that would be an easy bet. What's your favourite food? Chocolate. Yes, Jamie? Chicken tikka. Strawberries. Ooh. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, enough about that, because today we're talking about fasting. It's part one, as Mark said, of two on prayer and fasting in preparation for our day of prayer and fasting on Friday, the 6th of September. There is information coming to you, and it has already come to you. More will be on its way. When I mentioned I was preaching on fasting to somebody a few days ago, I got a little bit of a funny look, some raised eyebrows, and I read between the lines, good luck with that one. Maybe some of us are well practiced in fasting. I don't know, it's not really something we talk about very much. But let's face it, I think we probably prefer the spiritual practice of feasting. I find fasting difficult, so I'll put my hands up there, and I guess that I'm not the only one. And fasting can be a difficult subject. I recognise it can be tricky for some people. Some have issues with food, perhaps eating disorders. Some people take certain medications that mean they can't fast, or they have medical conditions, and that is okay. That is, please stick to your medical advice. Fasting is mentioned quite often in the Bible, though, throughout the Old Testament and the New. The Israelites regularly fasted it was twice a week, as well as for special occasions, for yearly occasions, and for things like crises as they arose, was one way that they would respond. Characters like Moses, Hannah, Nehemiah, Anna in the New Testament, and of course, Jesus fasted for 40 days in the wilderness to prepare himself for ministry. And the early church continued with this twice a week regular practice, although they changed the days slightly for various reasons. And it wasn't until the early church in sort of 300-ish BC, when Constantine came to the throne and Christianity became the state religion, and fasting became associated with legalism. And so since then, I think Christians have had an up and down relationship with fasting, shall we say. Probably not so much down as up, but yes. Wesley, for example, used to refuse to ordain anybody who didn't fast at least twice a week. That was the Methodist Church. But today is a very different story. We've got food everywhere we look, on every street corner. It's very easy. We have lots of convenient food, lots of processed food, and whilst I'm not trying to make excuses, I think it is harder for us, probably because of the processed food we eat affects our bodies. But I'm not saying we shouldn't fast, in fact, not at all. Fasting has been described as one of the most powerful and neglected of all Jesus' practices, making it probably one of the least well understood as well. Fasting is a form of prayer, and therefore we will expect it to have a degree of mystery. I mean, nobody fully understands prayer when you really think about it. But perhaps it's time for a comeback. Okay, looking at this slide. Can you remember the days when Christians were known for wearing socks with sandals? My dad used to wear them with socks with sandals, and I used to find it mortifying. Well, just as Christians have finally got their heads around slipping their sandals on with bare feet and saving their socks for proper shoes, lo and behold, socks with sandals have come back into fashion. Would you believe it? And everyone's probably looking at my feet. I don't have any socks on with my sandals, but I never claimed to be fashionable. But apparently my daughter is. Like socks with sandals, fasting is all the trend in the secular world at the moment. Mostly for physical health reasons, rather than spiritual, of course. But this preach is not about being fashionable, and some of you will be breathing a sigh of relief. Thankfully, Jesus isn't particularly concerned about whether we have good fashion sense. He's much more concerned about the state of our souls, our hearts. And he's given us a gift, gift of fasting to help our souls as well as our minds and our bodies. We all go through life, we get hungry at certain points of the day, sometimes more, sometimes less. But we're not always consciously aware of our bodies being busy away behind the scenes, digesting the food, breaking it up and eliminating the waste. We know that we are dependent on food and all the nutrition and all the nutrients, but we don't always give the detail much conscious thought. Likewise, we can go about our day without much conscious thought about our dependence on God. The fact that every breath we breathe is a gift from God. His love and his power continually upholding us. And hearing from Pat how she's been really conscious of that this week, but often we are a little less in tune with that. But the very best thing in our lives is him. We were made to be dependent on him. And as we fast, we become more aware of our body's dependence on food. And that reminds us that we actually have an even greater need and dependence on God. But fasting is a bit of a lost art, isn't it, in the modern Western church? And we're really missing a trick. The thing is, although as difficult and as unpopular and uncomfortable as it can be, it's really, really good for you. And I'm not just talking physically, although isn't it amazing that God gives us a spiritual practice that has lots of physical benefits too? And there are so many spiritual benefits that I can't cover them all in one preach. But I do hope that I'm going to entice you to maybe have a go, read a bit more. So Isaiah 58, which we heard Mary read to us, God speaks through his prophet to the people of Israel about 700 years before the birth of Jesus. It's a stormy time and there are clashing of superpowers and Israel is declining. We hear that the Israelites clearly were regularly practicing fasting, but there were definitely some issues about how they did it and why. We know that fasting causes us to feel hungry. This state of physical longing and desire for food, though, mirrors our spiritual state. We see in verse 2, we're told that the Israelites were fasting as if they were righteous. As if. But it was all just a pretense, a facade for their underlying self-righteousness. In verse 3, they claimed that they'd humbled themselves, but they weren't practicing humility. It was all just a show to try and prove how spiritual they were. And so God points to their lives. He says, "Did you think I wouldn't notice your selfishness and quarreling and fighting? Did you think I would turn a blind eye to the way you oppress your workers?" No. God sees straight through it, and he's like, "I don't think so." God isn't impressed with all that outward appearance of their fast. He's interested in their hearts underlying it. Because there's no evidence that their hearts have been involved or transformed at all. It's just been a physical act, not a spiritual fast. And it's so important that our spiritual lives don't become ritualistic, just something that we go through the motions. We say things, we do things, but they become quite shallow or even completely hollow. And God also points to their hearts, because worse still, their fasting has actually hindered their prayers rather than helping them. Because they think that their fasting has made them righteous. And it's so important that our spiritual lives don't become legalistic. We're not doing the things that we do to make us good Christians. as if we could earn God's love. We are under grace, and fasting must come within that realization. It means our relationship with God is not dependent on whether we can get our hearts right in fasting or in anything else. And of course, it was for this very reason that Jesus died on a cross for us. Fasting can't earn us any favor with God because we already have it in Jesus. Fasting is also not a rule to be obeyed. It's an opportunity to be taken advantage of. There's actually no direct command in the Bible that we must fast. It is talked about quite often, and it's more like when you fast rather than if you fast, but it's not you must fast. So God gives the Israelites the bad news. It says in verse 4, "Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high." But did you spot within that sentence there's actually some good news with the bad? Because if this sort of fasting doesn't get us in tune with God, then perhaps there's a type of fasting that does. And the passage goes on to describe some of the other benefits that are seen when the heart is involved in fasting. God expects to see freedom from oppression, challenge to injustice, feeding of the hungry, clothing of the naked, and housing of the homeless. The outworking of fasting is going to be transformation, not just in our hearts, but it's going to play out in our lives. That natural overflow of grace. Because true fasting tunes our hearts into God's heart. And as we're transformed to become more like him, we share his heart for those who are suffering. The Israelites, though, they thought that by going through the motions of fasting, that would mean that they would be entitled to something from God. But fasting isn't a way of twisting God's arm. It's not like a spiritual equivalent of puppy dog eyes. Oh, please, God, please. It's no guarantee that we'll get whatever it is that we want. But what we get is so much better than any of that. We get more of God. We find that we're walking more closely with him, more aware of his presence, more in tune with his Holy Spirit, and our hearts becoming more sensitive to his and to his plans and purposes through us and in us for the world around us. And from verse 8 onwards, we see that the benefits are not just for others, but that actually there are benefits for us too. There are blessings. It says, verse 8, "Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. You shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, 'Here I am.' Verse 11, "The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places. You shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail." That sounds quite good, doesn't it? And then if we scan down to the final verse, it says, "You will find your joy in the Lord." That kind of joy that we can only find in his presence. And what a wonderful gift that is. Fasting is a gift of grace. I'm not sure if I've convinced you yet, but it is. It's a gift of grace. It's not a stick that God wants to bash us with or that we have to bash ourselves with. It may not be enjoyable, but it produces the fruit of joy in our lives. It helps us to tune into his spirit and be transformed. And yes, there are other ways in which we can also do that. So we don't have to fast, and if we don't, God will still love us. But if we really realized how amazing this gift is, then why wouldn't we? So how do we fast? How long should we fast for? How often should we fast? But first, just to check you're all awake still, a question. What is the longest documented fast from food? Do you think? How many days just from food?
40 days.
Jesus did 40 days. Do you think there's anyone that's managed longer than that?
Yeah.
Yes. How long do you reckon? What do you reckon, Luke? 75 days. We've got 4 years. Okay. Yeah. Any advances? 100? Well, apparently it is 382 days by a chap called Angus Barbieri in 1966. He was on the large side before, and he lived for another 30 years after. So he did it for physical health reasons, not for spiritual health reasons. But interesting, because we kind of think, oh, I'm dying after like 3 minutes of fasting. How you fast, though, is going to depend on whether you're new to fasting or whether you're a seasoned professional. If you've never fasted or you haven't fasted for a long time, then you're going to want to build up slowly. Perhaps you're just going to delay breakfast for a couple of hours, and then the next week, maybe you'll another couple of hours. It depends very much on you. If you don't wake up hungry and you never eat breakfast, not eating till lunch isn't really fasting, is it? I know, fall to that camp. Some people say, oh, I forgot to eat today. I didn't even notice I was hungry. And I don't think I've ever knowingly forgotten a meal, but, you know. But yeah, over time, build it up. Start slow and grow. See if you can fast for a whole day or a 24-hour period, if that's medically possible for you. But keep drinking water. Keep well hydrated. And use the time that you would have spent preparing, eating, clearing up food, which is probably quite a while if you include all those aspects. Take those times out to pray. Perhaps you might even want to give the money that you would have spent on that meal or 2 meals or however many long, and give that money to perhaps to the food bank or to some other charity that feeds the poor. And use your fast as a way of standing with the poor. Of those who do advocate fasting, and practice it regularly, people often talk about fasting once, maybe twice, but often once a week. But the reality is only a very small percentage of Christians fast as often as weekly. So if you don't, you're in good company, and there's no discouragement or condemnation here. Instead, just think what might happen if you did. We don't want to be like the Israelites who thought they could put on a show for God, though. You know, oh God, I hope you're watching. I'm so hungry. It's been a whole 53 minutes since I've eaten. Like prayer, it's not something that we make a show of. It's something between us and God. And yes, you might need to let other people know sometimes, because you don't want to schedule lunch for a friend, because it can be a bit awkward if you're just sitting across the table, staring at their food, drooling, whilst you listen to them chomp very noisily. But when we fast, we notice our physical hunger, how much our bodies are needing and crying out for food if we deprive them of it. But we can use that physical hunger as a reminder of our need for God, and take that hunger and channel it as a prayer to God. It's our bodies, we're praying with our bodies as well as with our minds. In some ways that makes it easier. We haven't got to think of any grand words. We just take that hunger and we just channel it and give it to the Lord. I think if we became half as hungry for him as we were for food, then our lives would be pretty transformed. And does it have to be food? This is one of the most common questions. I'd say no, it doesn't have to be food. If medically you can fast from food, I think often this can be the best option, but it's not possible for everyone, and that's okay. Some people fast from watching the TV or from their smartphones. There's no record in the Bible of that, though. Personally, I like to fast from parenting. But I'm just joking. Well, sort of. But we just need to watch our motives in what we choose to fast for. Are we fasting from a certain thing because it's a lot easier? Because actually we don't really miss that thing. Or are we fasting because we want to use that longing for whatever that thing was, that desire for that thing, to pray and seek the Lord? So there might be other things that we can fast from that would have that same effect. If you spend a lot of time watching the TV or scrolling on your phone, a day where you turn your phone off, unplug your TV, that could easily serve the same purpose. You could get hunger pangs for technology, I reckon, for sure. And you could use that time. In fact, probably you spend more time on a screen than you do eating a day. I don't know. Use that time for prayer. Just figure out a way that has a similar effect for you. I liked this description of fasting. A form of unbroken intercession. And if you're somebody that's blessed with a high experience of hunger, you have a high experience of unbroken intercessory prayer potential within you. And as I said, we're going to be fasting as well as praying on our day of prayer and fasting. We are going to have lots of opportunities to pray in different ways, but they're all going to be more reflective ways. We're going to break the fast together at 9 o'clock on the Saturday morning with food. But we're going to fast from, depending on you, from the breakfast of the day before. So if you're not perhaps sure whether you'll manage the whole 24-hour period, you might want to pick a time later in the day to start. And then, if you just fast from dinner to breakfast, that's fine. If you can manage lunch, great. If you can manage breakfast, then we're not going to be giving out gold stars for different lengths. It's not something that we're going to be checking up on. And even if you don't manage it, you're still welcome at the prayer breakfast. We just want this to be a day when we can all unite together in prayer as a church. We want to seek the Lord's face, that's who he is, and not just his hand, what he can give us. We're not aiming to come with a big shopping list of requests, although nothing wrong with that. We're trying not to have too much of an agenda ourselves. We're just wanting to seek the Lord, to be with him, to know him better, to get our hearts more in line with his, so that we will be transformed as individuals and as a church to reflect his heart for those around us. We're going to have some short set times of guided, meditative, reflective prayers, and then opportunities for people to sit quietly and just pray silently. Those are going to be at set times throughout the day, but there's going to be a prayer room where you can just drop in at any time and pray. Just pray quietly, as well as the slots that I mentioned that you can pray from home, of course, or you can pray from anywhere. We trust that as we do this, we're going to get a sense of God's heart for us as a church in this time of interregnum. Okay, we're coming into land now. I've been reading this week on the importance of finishing your preach with a clever or catchy phrase. So here we go. These are my options. Don't be slow to fast. Start slow and grow. Fast to catch up with God. I don't know. 3 for the price of 1. You're welcome. Perhaps more helpfully, I'll finish with this reminder. Fasting doesn't earn us favor with God. It's not a rule to be obeyed. It's an opportunity to take our eyes off the things of the world and focus them completely on God, to channel our hunger as desire for him, drawing near and tuning in, experiencing transformation of our hearts and lives. So let's pray. God, we recognize that we are completely dependent on you. God, so often we are not aware of that. But we want to reorient our hearts towards you. We want to know you more nearly and follow you more closely. We want to be transformed. We want our hearts to beat in time with yours for the things that your heart beats for. God, would you grow us in this spiritual discipline of fasting? Give us the grace for it. Help us to appreciate what a gift it really is. And Lord, as we commit as a church to this day of prayer and fasting, Lord, help us all to engage in that in whatever way you're calling us each to do, that we might know your heart for this church, for this community around us, that you'd fill us with your Spirit for your glory, Lord. Amen.